I wish I could say that Christmas had always been a joyful time for me. That the smell of cinnamon and roasted ham brought back warm memories. That the carols playing on the radio made me smile. That the lights strung across windows reminded me of laughter and love. But the truth is, Christmas has always been complicated. A ritual of forced smiles and subtle exclusions. A parade of performances where I was always the understudy. Never quite meant to take the stage every year. It was the same, plans made. Without me, group chats I wasn't added to. Decisions finalized before I even knew there was something to be decided. And then, a day or two before Christmas Eve, someone, usually my sister, would send me a message. Not a call. Never a warm voice, just a short, cold text like we're having dinner at Mom's. Just so you know. That was their version of an invitation. This year, it came again. December 23rd, 6:42 p.m., a message from Melissa. Dinner's at 7 tomorrow. If you're coming, don't be late. No hope to see you, no we'd love to have you. Not even a polite emoji, just instructions. Like I was being summoned out of obligation, not invited out of affection. I stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Tempted to ignore it like I had last year. Tempted to delete it, to pretend it never came, to do what I'd trained myself to do since childhood, disappear before they made me disappear first. But something inside me shifted this time, a small, aching part of me still believed that maybe things could be different. That maybe this year, they'd save me a seat. That maybe my presence would be wanted, or at least acknowledged with something more than an eye roll. I told myself, go. Show up, don't give them another reason to pretend you never tried. So I picked out a soft burgundy sweater, the one that makes me feel like myself. I baked a small pecan pie my grandmother used to love, the recipe she taught me when I was 11, back when she was the only one who seemed to notice I was in the room. And on Christmas Eve, I drove across town with that pie on the passenger seat, humming nervously to the carols on the radio and trying to silence a familiar voice. Inside that whispered, you know how this ends. The neighborhood looked like something out of a postcard, glowing lights, neatly shoveled driveways, the faint smell of wood smoke in the air. I parked outside my parents' house, took a deep breath, and stepped into the cold with the pie carefully balanced in both hands. As I approached the door, I could hear the faint sounds of laughter, the clinking of silverware, the swell of conversation. My heart beat faster. They started without you, the voice in my head said. I rang the bell. It didn't take long, the door swung open, and there she was, Melissa, my sister, perfect hair, flawless makeup, wearing one of those overpriced Christmas sweaters that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her eyes landed on me, and immediately rolled with such force that it felt like a slap. She sighed, not subtly, but theatrically, and then said the words I'll never forget. Oh, you actually came. Her mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a grimace. Well, we don't really want you here, Angie. Maybe go ruin someone else's holiday. I froze. I must have looked ridiculous, standing there like a lost delivery girl, arms full of pie, blinking against the cold and the humiliation. She didn't wait for me to respond. She stepped aside just enough for me to see into the dining room behind her. The long table covered in food, candles flickering, people already seated, my mother passing wine, my father carving a roast, cousins laughing with mouths full. No one looked toward the door. No one noticed I was there, or if they did, they pretended not to. I swallowed hard, my lips were trembling, but I refused to cry. Not in front of her, not again. So I took a breath, held the pie tighter against my chest like it might shield me from the cold, and said, as calmly as I could, got it? 2 words, that's all. Then I turned around, walked down the steps and back into the night. The door shut behind me with a casual thud, like the final note of a song I never got to sing. I didn't look back as I walked away from the house, from the warm light strung around the windows and the muffled sounds of laughter that spilled out behind me. I realized I wasn't walking into the cold, I was walking into clarity. For 33 years, I had been orbiting that house like a satellite desperate to be pulled into gravity. But now I understood. They never intended to let me land. They never saved a place for me, and they never would. The street was quiet. Snowflakes drifted slowly under the amber glow of the street lamps. My boots left soft crunches in the snow. And I remember thinking how absurd it was that a night so cruel could look so beautiful. The pie was still warm in my arms, and for a few moments I clutched it tighter, not sure where to go or what to do. I had no plan. No one else to visit. I hadn't made any backup arrangements because, deep down, I truly hoped this year would be different, and yet, here I was again, excluded, erased, dismissed with a smirk and a door slammed in my face. It wasn't just the words that hurt. We don't want you here, go ruin someone else's holiday. It was the ease with which she said them, the sheer casualness, like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. But the worst part wasn't the insult. It was the image burned into my memory, the full dining table behind her, my entire family, every single one of them, gathered around a meal, laughing, sharing stories, clinking glasses, and not one of them asked, "Where's Angelina?" Not one had noticed the missing plate. Or worse, maybe they had and simply didn't care. I remember standing at the end of the driveway, staring back at the house, debating whether I should throw the pie on the lawn, scream, make a scene. But I didn't because I knew that if I did, they would use it against me. There she goes again, being dramatic. That's always been a narrative. That I was a sensitive one, the one who took everything too seriously, the misfit, the storm cloud in every sunny photo. But I wasn't angry, not yet. At that moment I was numb. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I was feeling too much, the rejection, the humiliation, the confirmation of what I tried so hard not to believe, that I didn't belong in my own family, that they had written me out of the story without telling me. I walked another block before I realized my hands were shaking. I sat on a park bench nearby, the kind usually covered in pigeons and morning joggers, but now covered in snow. The pie sat beside me, forgotten. I looked up at the dark sky and asked myself, why do I keep trying? Why do I keep hoping they'll see me? That's when I heard it. Footsteps stopped fast, crunching footsteps pounding through the snow. I turned my head, half expecting to see a random stranger, but instead I saw my father, breathless, coatless, eyes wide, running down the sidewalk like something was on fire. Angelina? He yelled, panic slicing through the air. I stood up, confused, watching him approach like a man who just realized something terrible. Angelina? He gasped, stopping in front of me, doubling over with his hands on his knees. Why? Why did you leave? Where are you going? Why didn't you stay? I couldn't speak. I just looked at him, trying to read his expression. He looked disoriented, shocked, like he was only just waking up from a dream he didn't know he'd been in. I didn't leave, I said quietly. I was never invited. He blinked, confused. But Melissa said you weren't coming. She told us you had plans. My stomach dropped. The chill in my bones wasn't from the weather anymore. It was from the realization that they didn't just exclude me passively. They planned it, they lied. Melissa lied. I came, I said. I stood at the door. She told me to go ruin someone else's holiday. So I did. His face paled. He looked back toward the house like he couldn't believe it. I didn't know, he said. I swear to you, Angie, I didn't know. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that at least one person at that table hadn't agreed to erase me. But even if he hadn't known, why didn't he notice? Why didn't he ask where I was when everyone sat down? I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry, I just nodded. He looked at the pie beside me on the bench and then looked back at me like he was seeing me. Really seeing me for the first time in years. Come back with me, he said. Please, we'll fix this. But I shook my head. Not tonight. Maybe not ever, because the truth is, I had already learned something far more valuable than an apology. That sometimes, the only way to stop being hurt is to stop showing up where you're not wanted, even if that place is your childhood home, even if the people are your own blood. Got it, that's all I said. 2 words, quiet, clipped, emotionless. But inside me, those words were volcanic. They were everything I hadn't said in 33 years wrapped into a single exhale. I saw my sister's smirk twitch, like she hadn't expected me to take it so calmly. Maybe she expected a fight. Maybe she wanted a scene. But I wouldn't give her that. I wouldn't give any of them that. So I turned around. I didn't look back at the table. Didn't look again at the flickering lights on the ceiling, or the fireplace where we used to hang stockings together as kids. I didn't look at the same old ornaments that used to feel like home, but now felt like props in someone else's stage play. I didn't even look at my father, who sat at the far end, staring into his wine like it had answers. No one stopped me, not even out of politeness. No one got up. Not a single voice said, wait. The door shut behind me, and with it, a piece of me shut down too, not out of anger, not even sadness, something colder, something final. And in that silence, in the snow-covered hush of the street, I realized I had reached the last page of a story that never really included me. All my life I had waited for a chapter where I belonged, where I would walk into a room and feel warmth that wasn't laced with judgment or comparison. But that chapter never came. And now I understood. I was never the reader of the story. I was a forgotten footnote. I walked to my car slowly, carrying the homemade pie with trembling hands. I had spent 2 hours on it that morning, even made the crust from scratch, something I hadn't done in years because deep down I wanted to offer something. I wanted to contribute. I had wanted to bring sweetness into a space that had only ever given me bitterness. What a fool I was. Sliding into the driver's seat, I placed the pie on the passenger side like it was a wounded friend. My fingers were stiff from the cold, but I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, watching my breath fog up the windshield. My coat suddenly felt too tight. My heart beat too loud, and then I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because there's a point where pain gets so sharp it bends back into irony. That was my birthday dinner all over again. When they forgot I was vegetarian and served me beef stew, then laughed when I quietly refused to eat. That was graduation, when no one came. That was every group photo where I was cropped out. That was every family vacation I wasn't invited to because I was too different. They always made it seem like I didn't fit, when in truth, they never made room. I turned on the ignition and drove, not home, just away. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew it had to be somewhere that didn't feel like this. Somewhere quiet, somewhere real. The streets were empty, the roads slick, and every red light felt like a moment to breathe, to sob without sound, to grieve what I still foolishly expected from them. To the next light, I picked up my phone. There were no messages, no missed calls. No one had noticed my silence, no one cared. The notifications were still from earlier. A coworker's holiday meme, a client's invoice, a charity reminder. But nothing from my family, not even from my sister, the queen of the night, the one who had handed me the final confirmation that I was never one of them. Got it, I repeated to myself. Those words echoed differently now. They weren't passive anymore. They weren't about accepting humiliation. They were about acknowledgement. They were a line in the sand, the final tally in a long ledger of being made to feel like an outsider. And you know what hurt most? It wasn't just my sister, it was the others. The people who used to braid my hair, who used to sneak cookies with me under the table, who used to read me stories, and sing carols and say they loved me. It was watching them laugh while I stood at the door, invisible. They knew I was out there, they saw me, and still, they said nothing. I pulled over near the Riverwalk, a spot I used to come to when I needed space. I parked, left the pie on the dashboard, and stepped out. The air was cold enough to sting, but I welcomed it. I wanted to feel something that didn't come from them. I sat on a bench and stared at the water. Somewhere, someone was probably crying tears of joy, opening gifts, sipping cider, singing songs. And I was here, abandoned again, not by accident, but by design. But in that moment, a strange strength settled into my spine. They didn't want me at the table, fine. I'd build my own, maybe not today, maybe not this season. But one day, there would be a holiday where I sat at a table filled with people who actually saw me. People who didn't just tolerate me, but chose me. People who made space without being asked. That would be my real family. Built, not born. Got it, I whispered one last time. And this time, it meant, I understand. I'm done, and I'm finally free. I walked without knowing where my feet were taking me. The snow had started falling heavier now, soaking into the sleeves of my coat, melting in my hair, chilling my skin. But I didn't care. My legs moved on their own, fueled not by purpose, but by a quiet, aching disbelief. I was outside on Christmas Eve, wandering through a festive city lit with golden strings and decorated storefronts, yet feeling colder than the air around me. It wasn't the temperature that hurt the most, it was the memory of my sister's eyes. The way she opened the door just a crack wider than necessary. How she rolled her eyes with calculated cruelty. How her lips curled into that smirk I used to mistake as nervousness when we were younger. But now, at 33, I recognized it for what it truly was, indifference dipped in venom. She had waited for that moment, she had practiced a line. "We don't want you here, go ruin someone else's holiday." It played in my mind again and again, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. The words themselves weren't shocking. What destroyed me was how easily they came. No hesitation, no flicker of conflict. Just the ease of cruelty delivered with perfect timing, like she was reading from a script. And inside the house, the laughter. Not a single person stood up. Not one voice said, "Wait, what?" I wasn't angry, not in that moment. Anger would have been easier. Anger is active, anger can be managed. What I felt was worse. I felt invisible. I felt deleted. As I walked, the memories came faster. Christmases from when I was little. When I was too young to understand favoritism, but old enough to feel the frost behind forced smiles. My sister always got the best gifts: the camera, the new boots, the surprise trip. I got socks, a recycled book, a sweater to sizes too big with the tag still attached, from a store I didn't shop at. But I told myself it was just coincidence. I told myself I didn't need more. That love wasn't about presents. But it was never just the gifts, it was how I was treated. Every year, I was the one asked to be understanding when I didn't get a stocking. I was the one told you're too sensitive when jokes were made about me being the quiet one, or the weird one, or the one who never quite fit. I was the one whose food was picked apart when I brought a dish to dinner. The one whose achievements were brushed off while my sister's every small victory was shouted from the rooftops. And I stayed, I kept showing up, kept bringing pies and presents and good intentions. Because I believed deep down that if I just kept trying, maybe one day I would feel what everyone else seemed to, that I belonged. But tonight ended that dream. The wind whipped down the alley, sharp and biting. I pulled my coat tighter and ducked into a coffee shop I used to go to in college. It was nearly empty, just a couple in the corner and a lone man on a laptop near the window. I ordered something warm and sat at a back table, letting the silence wrap around me. My hands trembled as I cupped the drink. But it wasn't the cold. It was a realization. My family didn't just forget me. They erased me. There had been no chair, no plate, no glass, no space at the table for me physically or emotionally. It wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally forget to count a person when setting the table. It was deliberate, calculated, a final message written not in words, but in absence. You are not welcome here. You are not one of us. I stared into the dark liquid in my cup, the steam curling like smoke from a fire that no longer warmed anything. I thought about what I would have said if anyone had spoken up. If someone had said, "We saved you a seat," or even just, "We're glad you came." I would have cried. I would have stayed. I would have forgiven everything in that one moment. But they didn't, because they never did. They never chose me, not once, not when I got into college, not when I published my first short story, not when I called crying from there, not when I came home early from a trip just to be with them at Christmas. I was always the afterthought, the optional piece, the uncomfortable silence they tolerated until they found an excuse to exile me again. But this time, the exile was public. This time, they made sure the rejection was seen, heard, and shared by everyone inside that glowing house. This time, they wanted me to feel it, and I did. And now, here I was sitting alone in a coffee shop on Christmas Eve, tears threatening to spill but never quite falling. I couldn't even cry properly. My chest hurt from holding it all in. But the dam didn't break. It just cracked. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes. Hours. Time felt strange, suspended like the snowflakes outside the fogged-up window. I thought about driving home, about curling up under a blanket and pretending none of it happened, about pouring a glass of wine and watching some dumb Christmas movie, where the family learns the true meaning of love just in time for the credits. But then I realized something important. This was my home now, this booth, this coffee shop, this quiet place where I wasn't unwelcome, where no one rolled their eyes when I walked in, where no one laughed when I wasn't looking. I didn't need a mansion with wreaths and garland and perfect sisters with sharp tongues. I just needed peace, a place where I could breathe without apology. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. No more begging for crumbs from a table I was never invited to. No more shrinking to fit their mold. No more showing up out of guilt. I would not let this be my story. I would not let them be the authors of my self-worth. Because I was done waiting at closed doors. I was done standing in the snow, hoping someone would see me. From now on, I would build my own warmth, my own table, my own light, even if it meant walking alone for a while longer. The coffee had grown cold in my hands by the time I noticed the snow was falling heavier, now clinging to the windows in thick flakes. I hadn't moved from my seat. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I just sat there, numb. I wasn't even sure how long I had been gone from the house. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. Time felt suspended, like the entire world outside that coffee shop had hit pause. Except the ache inside my chest kept playing on loop, and then the door burst open. I looked up, startled. The bell above the cafe door jingled violently, followed by a gust of icy wind and frantic footsteps. It took me a second to register what I was seeing. My father, stood there, panting, his coat flapping open, eyes wide with panic, scanning the small cafe like a man desperate to undo something irreversible. He saw me, Angelina. He shouted, as if he were afraid I'd disappear if he didn't say my name fast enough. I froze, my heart raced, my fingers tightened around the paper cup for a moment. I didn't believe it. It felt like a dream. But there he was, face red from the cold, breathing hard, eyes brimming with something I had never seen in them before, urgency. He rushed over to my table, his boots squeaking against the wet floor. "Thank God," he breathed out. "Thank God you're still here." I didn't speak. I just stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh, or to apologize. On behalf of my sister, like he always did, with excuses, with vague hand waves, with "you know how she is." But he didn't. Instead, he dropped into the seat across from me and leaned forward, his voice quieter now, but still shaking. "Why didn't you come in?" That was a question that shattered the moment. I blinked slowly. "What do you mean?" I said, my voice low and raw. He looked genuinely confused. "Why didn't you come inside?" I shook my head in disbelief. I did. And then it was his turn to blink. I knocked. I continued. She opened the door. She told me to go ruin someone else's holiday. Then she slammed it in my face. He looked stunned. Stunned in the way someone looks when they've just realized the movie they've been watching isn't the one they thought they bought a ticket for. No. He muttered. She told me you weren't coming this year. She said you had plans. I believed her. I scoffed quietly, not out of mockery, but out of exhaustion. Did you even ask? He winced like the words had slapped him. And maybe they had. He looked down at the table, eye scanning the surface as if trying to find an answer there. She told everyone, said you sent a message that you were traveling. She even said you were tired of the family drama, that you didn't want to be part of it anymore. That part, I suppose, had a hint of truth in it. I was tired, but not tired enough to completely walk away, not then. I had still shown up. I still believed I had a place. She lied, I said. You believed her. And no one bothered to check. He looked up at me again. When we sat down to eat and your chair was empty, I thought maybe you were late. Then I asked. She looked me straight in the eye and said you weren't coming. She even made some joke about how it's better this way. Fewer dishes to wash. I laughed along with the others. I didn't know. Now you do. Silence hung between us like fog. Behind him, the barista wiped a counter. The couple in the corner laughed softly. Life went on. Indifferent to the moment unraveling at my table. He swallowed hard. Angelina, I didn't know. I swear to you, if I had known. I raised a hand to stop him. But you didn't. He deflated. That's the only way I can describe it. He shrank in his seat, the guilt settling on his shoulders like the snow on his coat. For the first time in my life, I saw regret in him. Real, raw, undiluted regret. Not the polite nods, not the forced, we'll try better next year. But this silence. This failure, it hit him where it hurt. He leaned forward. Come back, please. Come back and have dinner with us. I'll make her apologize. I'll set your place myself. I stared at him, torn between the ghost of the daughter I had always tried to be, and the woman I had become. Through the pain of being forgotten, part of me wanted to believe him, to grab onto his outstretched hand and pretend the words of the door were a bad dream. But the deeper part, the wiser part, knew better. I'm not coming back, I said gently. Not tonight. His lips parted to speak, but he said nothing. He just nodded, eyes dropping to the table again. I think he knew. He knew that this wasn't just about the door being closed, it was about years of doors half open. About always being the last choice, about being remembered only when I was already gone. After a pause, he looked up and asked, can I stay for a bit? That I didn't expect, but I nodded. And so we sat in silence. Father and daughter, at a table no one else had set for us, no tree, no candles, no laughter, just honesty, cold coffee, and a quiet that somehow felt more like Christmas than the house ever did. I watched my father sitting across from me, his coat slowly soaking from the melted snow clinging to his shoulders. He looked smaller somehow, like age had finally caught up to him. In the time it took to walk those blocks from the house to the cafe, his hands were clasped tightly on the table, trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Guilt, maybe, or shame, I didn't know. He said again, softer this time, as if trying to convince himself. The words hung between us like frost on the window, fogging up the past, blurring the lines between ignorance and complicity. I didn't say anything. What could I say? That's okay. It wasn't, not really. But I also wasn't there to punish him. I wasn't seeking revenge, I just needed truth. Something honest, something unfiltered. He cleared his throat. Your sister told us weeks ago that you wouldn't be coming. Said you were taking a trip to Europe with your husband. She even said you had asked not to be contacted, that you needed space. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Space, I repeated. She used my silence as a weapon. He nodded slowly, eyes lowered. She made it sound like it was your decision, that you didn't want anything to do with us. And no one called to check. He winced. Your mother said not to. She said if Angelina needs space, give it to her. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from saying something I'd regret. There it was again, the casual neglect, wrapped in what sounded like understanding. The same pattern I'd known all my life. They always believed the version of me someone else created. They never asked me who I really was. She's been telling that story about me for years. I muttered that I'm dramatic, that I'm distant, that I don't want to be part of the family. My father looked up. I didn't realize how much of that we just accepted without asking you. I nodded slowly. That was a real betrayal, wasn't it? Not the door slammed in my face, not the missing plate at the table, but the quiet, dangerous power of being misrepresented and no one ever challenging the lie. He leaned forward. Why didn't you ever say anything? I looked at him, straight in the eyes. Because every time I did, you told me I was imagining things. His face crumpled just a little. But enough, I never meant to make you feel like you weren't wanted, he whispered. But you did, I said, not to accuse, just to say it aloud because it was true. It was how I had felt for years. He nodded and we both sat there, wordless again. I wish I had gone to the door myself. He finally said. I should have. I thought you were late. And when I asked, he paused, then shook his head. She was so convincing. So casual. That's how she's always been with me, I said, convincing. Casual, cruel. He opened his mouth. But I cut him off gently. And I let her be. Because you all did, because I didn't want to be the one causing tension. So I swallowed it every year, every dinner, every holiday. His hands were still trembling, now gripping his own fingers like he needed something to anchor himself. I think I let your mother and your sister speak for all of us for too long, he admitted. Because it was easier, because silence keeps things peaceful. No, I said softly. Silence just makes the noise behind closed doors louder. He looked at me again, and this time, I could tell he was listening, really listening. I know I can't fix all of it, he said. But I want to start by not pretending anymore. I want to hear from you, not from what your sister says about you. I took a breath. It felt unfamiliar, like air after holding it for years. That's all I ever wanted. I replied, to be seen as me. The coffee shop was almost empty now. The lights above us buzzed quietly, casting soft shadows across the table. Outside, the snow kept falling, slow, quiet, relentless, a soft burial of the old year. He looked at me with eyes that were older now than they were even an hour ago. I can't ask you to forgive everything. I'm not there yet, I said honestly. But you came after me. That matters. I didn't want you spending Christmas alone, I smiled. Just slightly. I've spent a lot of Christmases alone, even in a full room, he nodded. Then maybe next year we can start over. Maybe, not a promise. But not a rejection, either. We stood together, finally, and walked slowly toward the door, as he opened it for me. I turned around for one last look at the empty cafe, and I realized the emptiness didn't hurt like it used to. Not now, not when I had finally been heard, not when, for the first time, someone had run after me not to fix me, but to understand. The snow hit my face as we stepped into the night. When we got back to the house, the warmth of the lights glowing inside didn't feel inviting, it felt staged. Like a scene already in motion before I ever arrived. My father's hand rested on the doorknob for a moment longer than it needed. Too, I could sense the hesitation in him, the quiet dread of what would come next. He wasn't a man who liked scenes. But this wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about truth. He opened the door. The laughter that had filled the house earlier was gone. The clinking of silverware had quieted. The kind of silence that rushes in when a truth is about to be confronted had already taken its place. My sister stood at the end of the hallway, still holding her wine glass like it was a prop. Her face twisted slightly, not quite a smile, not quite concerned. Behind her, our mother was seated at the table, straight-backed, stiff like a portrait. The rest of the family looked from face to face, pretending not to see what they were all silently waiting for. Angelina, my mother said finally. You came back. I didn't answer. My father walked ahead of me, shedding his coat. We need to talk. My sister raised an eyebrow. Dad, let's not ruin dinner. Quiet, he said. Not harsh, just firm and somehow more commanding than I had ever heard him. My sister blinked, lips parting in surprise. I just want to know one thing, he said, turning fully to her. Did you tell us Angelina wasn't coming tonight? She shrugged, her voice light. Well, you know how she is. She always cancels last minute. I assumed. No. He interrupted. You told us she wasn't coming, not that you assumed. Not that you thought. You were certain. You told us she was out of the country? That she didn't want to be contacted. Everyone was still now. Forks frozen in midair. Chew stopped halfway. Only my sister kept that cool, slippery smile that never reached her eyes. She's being dramatic again, she said with a sigh. It's always something with her. I stepped forward then. For the first time since I walked back through that door, I found my voice. There was no plate set for me, not one chair, not one greeting. That wasn't an accident, that wasn't a misunderstanding. You weren't even supposed to be here, she snapped. I was trying to keep the peace. Peace for who? I asked. You, Mom. Everyone who finds me inconvenient because I don't play along with the fantasy. My mother's voice came next, measured, cold. This is not the time for theatrics. Oh, now it's theatrics. I laughed bitterly. You let her rewrite the story of me for years. You believed every word because it was easier than asking why your other daughter never felt welcome. Because deep down you agreed with her. I turned toward the table. Aunts, uncles, cousins. I saw them all looking at their plates, pretending to be neutral, pretending to not remember the small jokes, the subtle exclusions. The way I was always treated as a footnote of the family story. You let her speak over me, speak for me, erase me. And now, when the truth shows up in the snow, you want silence again. My father stood behind me, quiet but present, a rare kind of presence, the kind I had needed years ago. I should have gone to the door myself, he said again. That's my failure. My sister rolled her eyes. Are we really doing this on Christmas? This is Christmas, I said. For once, this is the truth at the table, my sister scoffed. You always needed everything to be about you. No, I said softly. I just wanted to be included. For a moment, no one spoke. The decorations on the wall seemed suddenly cheap, the warmth of the room oddly fake. The holiday spirit that had once filled the air was replaced by something more real, more raw. I'm leaving again, I said. But this time, not because you shut me out. This time, I'm choosing it. My father touched my arm. Are you sure? Yes, I nodded, because now I know the truth, and once you see it, you can't go back. My sister smirked. Good, you've always been the outsider anyway. No, I said. Meeting her eyes, you just needed me to stay small so you could feel big. But I'm not small anymore, and with that, I turned toward the door. My coat still damp, my boots heavy from melted snow, but my chest lighter than it had ever been. My father didn't follow me this time. He didn't need to. He had already chosen his truth outside. The air was still sharp, but I welcomed it. The cold reminded me I was alive, that I had endured, that I had finally spoken what I had carried for decades in silence. And I knew, as I walked down that street, the door behind me would never open quite the same way again. After the confrontation, I didn't leave right away. Not physically. My feet lingered on the porch, my hand resting on the cold metal of the railing. I needed a breath now. I needed a reckoning. A moment to let it all settle. To allow the weight of what had just happened to sink into my skin, like the winter air, already numbing my fingers. I had walked back into that house out of instinct, out of pain. But now I stood here on my own terms, not because I was dismissed, but because I had made the decision to walk away. Still, something about the dining room kept echoing in my mind like a haunting melody that refused to quiet. There was no play for me. It wasn't just a forgotten detail. It wasn't a clumsy oversight. It was intentional. That's what pierced deeper than anything my sister had said. I had stood in that doorway, snow in my hair, breath visible in the cold, and I had looked into a warm, perfectly lit dining room, and there was no space for me. Not a chair, not even a folded napkin. Everyone else had their place, their comfort, their welcome, their laughter. Me, I was an interruption, a glitch in their curated celebration, a reminder of something they'd rather forget or pretend never existed. The empty space at the end of the table wasn't empty because someone was late. It was empty because they never expected me to be there. Or more truthfully, they never wanted me to be there at all. I had spent my whole life believing I just had to try harder, show up with a smile, bring a dish, wear something nice, laugh at their jokes, offer help, be useful, be invisible, be smaller. Just enough to be tolerated. But they never made space for me. And now that fact wasn't metaphorical anymore. It was literal. It was tangible. I could still see the polished wood of the table, stretching out, plates gleaming under soft chandelier light, wine glasses tilted in mid-toast. There had been place cards with names, carefully written in cursive. I remembered seeing one that read Cousin Bethany, and another that said Uncle Harold. Even the baby had a little high care with a bib placed over it. But not me. No Angelina. Not even a blank placeholder, nothing. That level of deliberate exclusion had told me everything I needed to know. And it ripped open every old wound I thought I had stitched shut over the years. Suddenly, every memory surfaced in brutal clarity. The childhood birthdays where I got books while my sister got parties. The family trips where I was told I wasn't invited because money's tight. Yet they posted beach photos without me. The Thanksgiving where my chair was pushed to the corner because there wasn't enough space. They never wanted me to feel like I belonged. They wanted me to accept being the background noise to their curated image of happiness, and for so long, I let them because part of me hoped that one day, they'd say we were wrong. That they'd see me. That someone would turn and say, there's no celebration without you. But this wasn't that story. No plate, no chair, no name. That was the truth they'd been trying to communicate all along. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. What's worse, that they executed it so effortlessly. No one stumbled. No one panicked when I showed up. It was rehearsed. My sister rolled her eyes and delivered her line like it was part of a script. She'd been waiting to perform. We don't want you here. Go ruin someone else's holiday. Not a flicker of hesitation. They all laughed. That was what stung. More than her words, the laughter. I was standing in the cold, visibly hurt, and they laughed. I saw my cousin lean into another's shoulder with a smirk. I saw my uncle cover his mouth like something hilarious had just happened. I saw my mother sip from her wine glass without flinching. And that told me more than any family story or shared blood ever could. That space at the table, the one that never existed, was symbolic of the space they never made for me in their hearts, in their priorities, in their traditions. I wasn't a missing piece. I was an unwanted one. It's strange how something as simple as an empty plate can hold the weight of an entire life of exclusion. That empty space was the climax of 1,000 smaller wounds. And when I saw it, really saw it, it was like every unspoken word, every avoided call, Every forgotten invitation was finally screaming in unison. You are not one of us. And the irony is, I used to beg for a seat at that table. I used to twist myself into silence and softness just for a corner of it. But standing out here, heart pounding, snow falling gently around me like quiet applause for my decision, I realized I no longer wanted it. Because if someone has to fight to be part of a family, is it really family? I turned back one last time, just for myself. Not to look for regret on their faces. I already knew there wouldn't be any, but to remember this feeling, the clarity, the painful beauty of truth revealed in something so mundane as a holiday dinner. There was no plate for me. But maybe, just maybe, that was my freedom. Because now I could build my own table. One where kindness is automatic, not earned, where people are cherished, not tolerated, where presence is welcomed, not weaponized, and at that table, there will always be a seat for those who come in from the cold with nothing but hope in their eyes, even if that person is me. I walked away a second time, but it wasn't like the first. That first time I had turned in silence, wounded and stunned, clutching invisible bruises under my coat. That first exit felt like abandonment, them discarding me like they always had. But this time was different. This time it was me who chose the silence. Not the kind that crushes you, the kind that protects. I stood in the foyer a moment longer, feeling the heat of their stares, the tension thick as rope around my chest. My father hadn't said another word since dragging me back inside. Maybe he was still processing the truth. Maybe the shame had started to seep into his bones. Or maybe, and this was the more likely answer, he didn't know what to do now that his perfect family dinner had a crack in it. Too visible to ignore. My mother still hadn't moved. She just kept drinking her wine, refusing to meet my eyes, acting as if the confrontation hadn't happened, as if ignoring it might somehow erase the mess. My sister, she looked annoyed, not ashamed, not apologetic, just inconvenienced, like I had ruined the performance. No one had even offered me a chair. There I was, still standing in the threshold of a house that never felt like home, and all the evidence I needed was laid bare. A table set for many, deliberately, excluding one, eyes that refused to acknowledge the pain they had caused. A room full of people who knew exactly what they were doing, and did it anyway. So I did what they never expected me to do. I smiled, not sarcastically, not bitterly. I smiled with the quiet strength of someone who had just reclaimed their worth. I took a breath, turned to my father and said softly, "You don't need to chase me anymore." His face flickered. "Angelina." "No," I interrupted, calmly. "I'm not leaving because you told me to. I'm leaving because I finally understand I don't need to stay." There were no dramatics, no slamming doors, no shouting. I just turned again, this time with my head high, and walked through the front door, into the winter air, not as someone cast aside, but as someone walking toward peace. The cold hit my skin and it felt clean, honest, like a baptism in frost. Stopped behind me. No one followed, and that was okay. For the first time, it was okay. Because I wasn't waiting for them to follow. I wasn't hoping for an apology, or a last-minute plea, or a miraculous change of heart. I knew who they were. I had always known, I just hadn't wanted to admit it. I had clung to the idea of family the way a child clings to fairy tales, believing that if I loved them enough, endured enough, proved myself enough, they'd one day say, "We choose you." But they never would, because choosing someone takes empathy, and this family was allergic to empathy. They preferred performance over connection, control over closeness. And for years, I had contorted myself to fit that dysfunction, silencing my needs, excusing their cruelty, letting them hand me crumbs and calling it affection. Not anymore. This exit wasn't about sadness, it was about clarity. It was about freedom, and it was mine. That I walked to my car, hands tucked into my pockets, exhaling white clouds of breath into the night. Christmas lights blinked from neighboring houses, some flashing red and green, others shimmering softly like stars scattered across porches. There were families inside those homes too, surely, some laughing, some arguing, some quiet, some chaotic. But I hoped at least a few where love wasn't conditional, where nobody got turned away at the door with a cold smile and a cruel joke. I sat in the driver's seat for a while before starting the car. My hands rested on the steering wheel, I staring ahead into the dark street, not really looking, just being. I wasn't sure where I would go next. Back to my apartment, maybe. Or maybe somewhere warm that stayed open late, where strangers didn't ask questions and the coffee kept coming. Wherever it was, it would be my choice. And that made all the difference. I wasn't running away from them anymore. I wasn't trying to belong to people who made it their mission to remind me I didn't. I was walking into a life where I was allowed to belong to myself. That's something they'll never understand. Inside that house, they'll probably go back to eating. The wine will keep flowing. They'll make up a story about why I left. Maybe say I was unstable, emotional, too sensitive. That's how they work. Rewrite the narrative until they're the victims. Let them, because this time, I don't need to defend myself. The truth is no longer something I'm desperate for them to admit. I saw it, I felt it, and now I'm living it. I am free and not in the way they once framed my absence as a relief, less drama, less tension. No. I am free because I chose to stop trying. I chose peace. I chose dignity. I chose love, not from them, but from myself. The door behind me might never open again. But I know now, I don't want it to. I used to think Christmas was about forgiveness, about keeping the family together, even if it meant breaking yourself into quieter, smaller pieces. I thought showing up was love, that if I kept showing up, even when I wasn't wanted, even when I was barely acknowledged, that someday it would be enough to earn me a seat, a real seat, one with warmth and welcome. But this Christmas, I realized something that changed everything. Showing up for people who hurt you isn't love. Showing up for yourself is. The drive home was quiet, peacefully quiet, not like the tense silence in that house, filled with unsaid things and fake laughter. This was a silence of clarity, of finally being done begging. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or collapse or scroll through my phone looking for distraction. I put the kettle on, I changed into warm socks. I lit a candle, vanilla and cedar. And I wrapped myself in a blanket, not because I was cold, but because I wanted to feel held. I wanted to feel safe, and for the first time, I realized I could give that to myself. I didn't need a house full of people to feel seen. I didn't need a table set by others to believe I deserved a place. I needed honesty. I needed the quiet kind of love that isn't loud or public or forced, the kind that simply says, I will not abandon myself again. And that, I gave myself. Later that night, I cooked dinner. Just for me. Nothing fancy, some roasted vegetables, a bit of pasta, red sauce, a sprinkle of cheese. Simple, nourishing. I played music too, not holiday music, but the kind I like. The kind they used to mock me for liking. I even danced a little while stirring the pot. I laughed at myself. I felt joy. It was small, but it was mine. I thought about what my sister would say if she saw me. She'd probably roll her eyes the way she always did. Say I was being dramatic, or trying too hard, or living in some fantasy. But that didn't matter anymore. Her voice no longer held weight in my decisions. Her approval no longer sat like a crown I'd been desperate to earn. She could keep her crown. I had no use for it now. In the days that followed, I expected messages, more manipulation, more attempts at rewriting the story. But what I received surprised me. Not silence, but noise. My phone buzzed with relatives who had witnessed what happened. Some apologizing for their silence, some just saying we saw it. I didn't need apologies, really. I just needed truth, and for once, I wasn't the only one holding it. One of my cousins wrote, "You shouldn't have had to walk away like that. I'm sorry we let it happen." I thanked him, but I told him this: I didn't walk away. I walked towards something better. And I meant it. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to make a scene or get even or send a long email listing everything they'd ever done to me. I just wanted distance, not the kind that punishes, the kind that protects. I wanted peace that didn't need to be proven or earned or bought with silence. This Christmas was the first time I gave myself that peace. It was the first time I gave myself the gift of leaving before the damage, of not explaining my worth to people determined not to see it, of not shrinking to fit into their version of who I was supposed to be, of not waiting to be called in when I had always been standing outside the door with my heart in my hands. That girl? The one who showed up despite knowing she wasn't wanted. She deserved more. And this year, I gave it to her. It didn't come wrapped in ribbons or bows. It came in the form of a closed door behind me, a quiet room, a simple meal, and a mirror where I could finally look and say, "You are enough. You always were." Maybe one day they'll understand what they did. Maybe they'll sit around that table and notice the empty chair and wonder if they pushed too hard, too far, too long. Maybe they'll feel it, or maybe they won't. That's not my burden to carry anymore. I'm not responsible for their healing, only my own, and healing, for me, looks like choosing to love myself louder than their silence. Choosing to build a life where I don't have to beg for a seat. Choosing to be the kind of woman who celebrates her own presence, even if no one else claps. This Christmas, I didn't get family. I got freedom. And that was the greatest gift of all.